speakers to listen to, so I will soon let them do that. But for the record then, what we will be talking about, I think we are moving a bit from still realizing that for most Northern European states, when you talk about European defense, it has been about crisis management, out of area operations, and territorial defense capability development. Also when it comes to territorial defense, has not really been framed within a European setting in that sense. It has been national, NATO, and a strong emphasis on the transatlantic link. So what we see now, and as defense spending is increasing also here to meet the new security environment, what should we do? That's basically the question for here. It seems to me highly relevant for Northern Europe to start shaping a common strategic outlook on European defense cooperation and take into account key issues that we have touched upon, such as relations to third countries outside of the EU, the maintenance of a transatlantic link, even the further development of that link, cost efficiency when it comes to procurement, avoidance of duplication with NATO, and so on. And in this process, I would like us, I hope we can reach to that hybrid warfare, the use of new technologies, multilateral force formations, the prospects for EU-NATO cooperation seems to me to glad of that. You know, the PESCO, the projects, the CARD, the planning, and the EDF, the defense fund, but it's of course relevant to ask how can they be useful, this instrument that the EU now is developing in securing Northern Europe in the future. And how should the complex nature of modern conflicts be reflected in the development of European defense, and there I include then hybrid warfare, the use of new technologies. And finally, we have the development of we have heard from the Minister of Peter Hultqvist and onwards, how we develop capabilities outside of the institutions, these minilateral force formations. We have the British JEF, we have the German FNC, the French E2I, as we have been discussing. How are they useful for this part of the world? So I'm very honored and glad to have this final discussion and to start off with Dr. Claudia Meyer, Senior Associate in the International Security Division at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, SWP in Berlin. Please, Claudia.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me first say again that's really a pleasure and I'm honored to be here. In particular, I have to say that maybe that's my German side, that I'm deeply grateful and I admire you for putting together panels which are very diverse in terms of gender, which is not always the case if you talk defense and security. So congratulations for that one. The last panel is a challenging one, so I try still to keep you awake for those who are still here. I think it's not only about, if you talk about northern defense, it's not only about what maybe countries like France and Germany propose. I think what is interesting when you come to that region is also to see how Nordic Baltic defense is perceived in, I would say, continental Europe. And I think if we talk about Nordic defense, let's say in my country, Germany, you deal with two major challenges. And the first challenge is there's little awareness about the very special and unique character of Nordic security and defense. So this patchwork of memberships, those who are EU but NATO, those who are NATO but not EU, those who are EU but not in CSDP. So this kind of institutional quandary is something which is not always very well understood. And that this institutional patchwork has a very direct operational effect is not really understood either. So if you want to defend the Baltics, you need the Finnish and the Swedish airspace, which are obviously not NATO members. So this is not making things much easier to understand than obviously of the 42/7 opportunity which Finland and Sweden and other EU states could rise. So it's fragmented and it's difficult to grasp. And then you have that very fragmented landscape when it comes to defense cooperation. Many bilateral, minilateral defense cooperation frameworks, but no overarching Nordic or Baltic defense framework. So that's adding to the challenge to grasp Northern defense, plus a very special UK role in the region as a major orientation point for security and defense. So the second challenge is, the more you talk about it in continental Europe, the more difficult it becomes. Because one very quickly gets the impression that there's actually no Nordic or Baltic security, or no Nordic and Baltic defense. But there are as many Nordic and Baltic defense approaches as we have countries in the region. And this lack of a unified position is making it very difficult to make the case in continental Europe. Even more, this is a kind of a problem, because obviously the region matters greatly to European security and defense, and it is more or less a test case whether European security and defense can in the end deliver. If something were to happen in the region, would the EU be able to decide and do something? If something were to happen, would NATO be able to do and decide? For those who have watched Trident Juncture, we might have our conclusions on that one. I don't say that the region is on the priority list number one of Russia, but it's so awfully convenient because you have this very Nordic puzzle of secure defense. Having said that, from a continental European perspective, I would like to make 3 points trying to address not all, I wouldn't ever pretend at that, but some of the questions that Anna raised. And I want to make 3 points. The one is there's no yet a convincing EU answer to those defense needs. The second is the challenge of a fragmented European defense landscape. And the third is more of a conclusion, very brief, where I would be interested in having a Nordic or Baltic, or whatever you want to call it, answer to current security challenges or current defense challenges. So my first is the lack of a convincing EU answer. I very much share your analysis, Anna, that those soup of acronyms is not really attractive. But at the same time, it has been hyped, they have been hyped so much last year when PESCO, CARD and EDF have been launched, that I think we should need to look at them, and if it's only to make a reality check. So if you look at those new EU instruments, CARD, PESCO, EDF, I'm afraid that so far they haven't really contributed to improve European defense. This is not the fault of the instruments, and I insist upon that, but that's the fault of the member states and the very way they choose to implement those instruments. PESCO, CARD and ADF do have a strategic potential, and they could address shortfalls. Intellectually they're attractive, their processes, the ambition to mutually reinforce themselves is very convincing. But to take one example, the current PESCO projects have not made their way through those wonderful diagrams and charts we see in Brussels. CARD identifies a problem, PESCO makes a project, EDF finances. This is in theory really beautiful. But the first and second round of PESCO projects have not been deduced from that process. They are political projects because EU member states, to a large extent, wanted it to be a success to showcase that Europe can deliver. That comes close to what Jana said in the first panel. It's about showing, it's about keeping the European house together and showing that integration is alive and kicking. Consequently, it's nothing really wrong about those projects, but they're not really helpful either. They don't address the capability shortfalls and the problems we have in European defense because their main function was political, showing that the EU is alive and kicking the times of Euroscepticism and Brexit. So some projects are helpful, like NATO mobility, but actually it's more helpful to NATO, not to the EU, I suppose. But many projects are old and not fulfilled, like the Euro grant. Or some are relabeled, like the indirect fire support. So the question I ask is like, is relabeling helping that countries are now serious about implementing them? Then I'm totally happy. But I doubt a little bit whether just changing labels would change actually the attitude of the states. So most of those projects are not the result of what the EU would need, but what the states were willing and capable to offer. Once the projects are really deduced from the project as foreseen, they can make a real difference. But that's not yet the case, but I would like to remain optimistic. So only having a very high number of projects is not an indicator of success. It's about what the projects address. So we need the right one to address the shortfalls. So the contribution of those projects so far is mainly political, and to remain optimistic, it's potential. Political unity in itself is an enormous achievement, and I don't want to underestimate it, again, in times of Brexit and Eurosceptical and populist movement, and a general return of the nation state. But keeping the house together is about integration, and as I thought, those instruments were about defense. So maybe we're mixing up objectives. So instruments can improve capabilities, but they do not automatically change political will and trust. They can. But the problem is that many European states don't seem to believe that the EU can deliver. The question is, how do you change that? How do you change the trust in the EU to deliver? And how do you change the approach of the states to believe that defense actually matters beyond the rhetorical level? These are the two questions, and not institutional beauty or aesthetics. That brings me to my second point. The traditional parameters for cooperation change, or the obsolete focus on institutions. The new EU initiatives might not yet, trying to stay optimistic, contribute that much, but others might, actually. There's a certain tendency, particularly in Brussels, to overestimate the results of CARD, EDF, PESCO, and all those things. But more interestingly, in fact, is that the pattern for cooperation in Europe is changing, and we had that already mentioned in the first and in the two other panels. So the driver for cooperation in recent times was not so much EU or NATO, but rather a coalition of European states in various formations. And now we're looking at the EU, we might be tempted to overestimate what the EU is doing. It's sometimes a bit of a self-referential approach, I'm tempted to say. It's not the only forum where things happening, and I'm tempted to say even not important. Let me give you some examples. Most of crisis management operations of recent history did not take place in the traditional frameworks. The anti-Daesh or anti-IS operation did not. Mali was reoperated. We kind of turned back into the EU, but it was a French mission first. So many have started on a different format and have then been put back on EU or UN. But most started nationally or on coalitions of the willing. Most meaningful defense cooperation still takes place outside the EU and the NATO structures. The integration of the Dutch and the German land forces didn't need the EU or NATO to actually do so. The close cooperation that France and Britain tried to have in Lancaster House also happened outside. You could also cite JEF, the British Joint Expeditionary Force, as another example, or the kind of coming close cooperation between the German and the Hungarian air forces. France, next example, France launched EI2 explicitly outside the EU and obviously NATO structures. Because it's not about institutional beauty again, but it's about capable and willing states that deliver and make a difference in defense. If you look at the industrial realm, those projects that are likely, if they were to happen, to define the future of the European defense industrial landscape, like the future combat air system that France and Germany signed last year, are again on purpose not in the EU structures. They are outside. And if you look in the area of politics, we see an increase of the structures like E3, be it on Iran, be it on Skripal, that are taking over. Brexit will reinforce that tendency of an informal coordination between the major states. You might have heard the Austrian foreign minister complaining that the bigger states don't show up in Foreign Affairs Council meetings. One wonders why. and one wonders where the real cooperation and coordination actually takes place. So you could carry on, go in other political areas like the Hanseatic League and economics, but let's stay in defense. If you look at those various formats, we could actually say there is progress in Europe, but the progress is in Europe and not principally in the EU. This tendency of various formats might be reinforced in the future because we have a general tendency of the nation state hitting back or the nation state coming back. The new European Parliament and the new Commission might have a very different shape and a very different political conviction than the old one used to have. Whatever happens to Brexit, I'm not capable to tell you. The UK, having engaged on that very special path, will change cooperation patterns too. We have increasing differences within the EU, which favors group buildings. And we have a stronger trend of bilateralization, particularly in defense, which we see in various bilateral agreements between the US and European states. And we have bilateral agreements which have the potential to undermine NATO, like the Polish-American agreement. Those patchwork or islands of cooperation don't need to be a problem as long as states manage to coordinate them. That's the biggest challenge. If the EU, as one format, can actually serve as a defense facilitator to support the development of capabilities, support research and joint acquisition, that's perfect. Those capabilities can be used in various formats. But I think what we actually need is that this requires us to think more about Europe and less about the EU. So in the end, it's about whether the EU countries are increasingly able to protect what they have built in Europe, be it in an EU framework or outside. So putting the EU a little bit back. To finish, my last point is what I call the need for a Nordic answer, keeping in mind that there's probably no Nordic except the European, because you have various approaches in security and defense policy. So as I said, Northern Europe, Northern Baltic security defense matters greatly to European security defense. And it's in many cases a test case of whether European defense, transatlantic defense can deliver. So looking at my NATO defense over that, it's not only about European, it's obviously also about transatlantic defense. So it's a test case for European and transatlantic case. But what I sometimes miss is a special Nordic or special Baltic, special regional voice in current debates. And there are several developments in which I personally, and I think many others, would be interested in hearing a Nordic voice. I'm talking about long-term developments that might shape the framework for European defense. I'm not interested in the next round of PESCO projects. I'm just trying to give you 3 topics. I'm not exhaustive. I know there are many others out. That's just a random choice of things. Where I would be interested, what the Nordic answer or the Nordic suggestion, the Nordic position and proposition would be. The first is, not surprisingly, and linking up to the first and second panel, is strategic autonomy. You might not like the word. I don't like it either, but it's out there. It's like the 2%. It's stupid, it doesn't really help, it's out there, so we better have to deal with it. There are work streams in Brussels working out on what strategic autonomy is, how we can achieve it, what does it mean, what it doesn't mean. So pretending it's useless, it's not helpful, doesn't really help us further. So I think the question is rather, what's the position in this region on strategic autonomy? What do you want to achieve? What are you willing to give in? Strategic autonomy, as I consider it, rather being a kind of managing dependencies in a wise way and taking it beyond defense. Because if the transatlantic relationship is changing, and if you look at the various areas of transatlantic relations, American trade, foreign policy, climate, in every area, we seem not to be on the same page anymore. So we have a structural change. Then we need to think about our capacity to act as Europeans in all those areas. I don't say that autonomy is an end state. I mean, previous panels agreed on that. It's about managing dependencies. The second topic is the INF, the potential end of the INF treaty. I think this is the biggest challenge for European security and defense, particularly in that region that is coming up as a debate in the time to come. What is NATO's answer to this strategic imbalance in the region. If you get this debate wrong, that can be deeply divisive for NATO. And the answers to what is NATO's reaction to protect its allies against those Russian weapon systems. I mean, that's the question we need to ask. What is NATO's answer to protect its allies against these systems? Do we agree on the answer within NATO? Those who can remember the DDPR some time ago don't want to do it again. So what is NATO's answer to that one? And what is the Nordic perspective on that one? What is your proposition, your suggestion on that one? Potentially that can be a bigger adaptation in NATO than we started in 2014, and a far more painful and divisive inside the alliance. And the last topic is China. My American friends tell me that China will be the decisive element defining transatlantic relations. Did we really get that in Europe? I'm not convinced we got that. And if you look at China's perception on foreign policy and the European perception on foreign policy, that's pretty much night and day. So what is our answer of the Europeans and of that region to the Chinese challenge in transatlantic relations? And what we are willing to do and what we are not willing to do? And with that,
Thank you so much, Claudia. Very interesting expose. And I especially am thinking about, you mentioned the formats we have, that, or the distinction between Europe moving and the EU moving, so to say. And when we have a range of, those are two different models: the institutional model, or the model of big states, and for Sweden and Nordic, Baltic, other states arranging themselves in relation to these bigger states. And here we have these initiatives of the JEF and the German framework nation concept, and also now the French initiative. What are the opportunities and you think challenges for smaller states when it comes to these kind of formations, given that we usually just are very pro everything to be within an institutional framework that gives us one voice at the table? But how should we navigate in this newer landscape?
I think you can see these smaller frameworks as reinforcing instruments. In the same time, they always inhabit the criticism of disengaging from European solidarity. So, if I look, for example, at the French EI2 initiative, I think the biggest challenge for countries like Estonia who joined is to actually say, where get I more support for my political problems? Where do I get more visibility? And more support for what I actually care about. And sometimes I tend to think that those smaller formats, where you have one country that is really interested in making things happen, can deliver better results. But the danger, and I think this is actually maybe the conclusion I would take from many of those smaller frameworks. If you have a country that wants things to happen, and you put your political capital in that format, it's far more promising. The challenge then is, can you channel that power in a way that it's not contradicting the overarching panels, the overarching formats like the EU and NATO? And if I stay with the format of the European Intervention Initiative, I don't see any contradiction in terms of content, because PESCO is not about operations. PESCO is about capabilities, but EI2 is about strategic culture. The only competition I see is on actually political capital. Where do I invest my capital and my commitment? Into something where I think it can deliver because a big country cares, or into something that I have to do because I want to stay in and I'm not really sure it's going to deliver. So I think there's a very difficult balance to strike actually between those rather powerful smaller frameworks, that they strengthen the bigger one and not undermine it. I think that's the balance you need to strike, which you have to decide for every case. There's no overall.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's. I hope we can come back to that because I think it's very interesting. Being a small nation, just a remark, is also navigating with the bigger the initiatives of the bigger countries. You always have to relate to that. This is a danger if I don't involve. But then, on the other hand, very strained resources for smaller nations to involve just people working with these issues. So that's an important balance and a difficult puzzle for us to navigate in this new landscape. Perhaps we can come back to that. And this bridges over well, I think, to our next speaker, Dr. David Bahar, who is Deputy Chief of Mission for the Embassy of France here in Stockholm. But you also worked before, you came here recently and worked at the French MFA with NATO and also European defense issues, all these new Macron initiatives. So very glad to have you with us in the panel, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Before I start, today I will focus my talk on this idea of strategic autonomy and solidarity. Before, just a few words on in reaction to what Claudia said. First, on the European tools we developed, because I contributed to these tools, and I know there are strange acronyms, but I would say yes that PESCO and CARD are political tools. I wouldn't say the same for the EDF, the European Defence Fund. For me, because we really pushed for that, it's a real revolution, and we can't see yet, because it hasn't started yet, what kind of revolution it would be. But the fact that the EU budget will spend 13 billion on the European defense industry is really a leverage for this solidarity we're looking for. And we were speaking about smaller states. And that's why we gave a big role to SMEs in the defense sector for the European Defense Fund. The idea is that we won't be able to develop the European industrial database unless we have enough, a critical mass of member states which actually have the defense industry and who are capable of absorb the different capabilities that they need. So for me, the EDF can really have a triggering effect. And I also want to say, because I think there are misunderstandings in Sweden, but we can come back to it. The EDF can be open. The funds can be open to all companies, entities that are established in Europe, not only the ones that are controlled by European stakeholders, but also others. There is a derogation that opens the funds to, companies such as BAE Systems or others. Also on strategic autonomy, I don't agree that it's a bad concept, obviously, because it's at the core of the French national doctrine, but now it's interesting to speak about what European strategic autonomy means. So today, I would like to try explaining why Northern Europe, and in particular Sweden, doesn't have to choose between European strategic autonomy and its transatlantic relationship. In fact, for me, there are two sides of the same coin. The same way Article 5 and Article 42.7 are. I've only been living here for 4 months in Stockholm, but there is something I have troubles understanding. France, a founding member of NATO, whose military relationship with the US has never been so deep, who is an independent nuclear power and has combat-proven troops and capabilities, feels this great sense of urgency and is trying desperately to convince its European partners of the necessity to stand on our own 2 feet. And Sweden, on the other hand, seems very aware of danger, but oddly enough, feels no sense of urgency when it comes to seeking European cooperation beyond its immediate neighborhood. Yet another thing that strikes me is the similarity between our two countries, between France and Sweden. Like France, Sweden has developed its own path as a strategically autonomous power. Although it renounced, unlike France, to develop nuclear weapons in 1966, it chose to remain military non-aligned while adopting a declaration of solidarity to EU member states and Nordic countries in 2009, and while adopting an MOU of host nation support in 2016. And like France also, Sweden took the necessary steps in the 1990s to keep a defense industry capable of building fighter aircraft and submarines. So I would say that although it hasn't been conceptualized in the same way, both countries have made sure to keep a high degree of strategic national autonomy. However, our latest choices, France and Sweden, have diverged. In a little more than a year, France made sweeping changes in the way it envisions its strategic interests. Not because we have renounced our national strategic autonomy, on the contrary, European strategic autonomy is seen as an additional layer needed to keep our national autonomy for several reasons. The first reason is that we don't have the resources in France to build all capabilities needed to carry enough weight in tomorrow's warfare, be it for AI, the growing militarization of space, hypersonic weapons, or to preserve freedom of movement in an A2AD environment. And also because for us, it's the only chance if we want the European defense industrial and technological database to survive, given the amounts that are spent elsewhere, especially in China and Russia. This is why, when we prepared France's new military planning law, we looked at filling our military needs primarily through European cooperation, and I contributed to preparing this military planning law, and really it was a cultural revolution. We really passed from a world where everything was seen through the lens of this national strategic autonomy to really trying to see where we needed bricks of sovereignty and all the other areas where we had to look for European partners. And this is the lens through which we see the programs of the next 5 years and 20 years in the case of SCAF or MGCN for the future camps. Also, when looking at what European strategic autonomy means, we need to think first about what is already at stake and how we responded to it. When the US pulled out of the JCPOA, we decided as Europeans to remain because we see it as an arms control agreement crucial to our security. And the same thing goes for other arms control agreements, including the new ones we will have to develop since the US and Russia are not really proactive on the matter, to say the least. And Europe is also strategically autonomous when condemning Russian bullying in the Kerch Strait, when protecting the data of its citizens, or when it continues to set, without the US, ambitious goals to reduce the pace of global warming. When it comes to military autonomy, of course, the equation is very different, given the central role played by our US allies in the strategic stability of Europe. And this is the reason why we have to be pragmatic and I think leave aside the ideological debates on duplication or no duplication and try to bet on what we could call a network of overlapping solidarities. And I insist on the word overlapping. And this network of overlapping solidarities goes in different layers. The first layer being our immediate neighborhood, like France did with the UK and with Germany, or like Sweden did with its Nordic partners. Also, of course, through the strengthening of NATO's defense and deterrence posture. Then through new military formats, such as the EI2, which will develop a common strategic culture. And, of course, through the EU, which is developing efficient tools to boost defense investments and is also working to develop military infrastructures, because mobility and logistics, as said earlier, is key in tomorrow's warfare. So it is only through such overlapping solidarities that we will be able to guarantee the security of Northern Europe, while at the same time sharing the burden in the fight against terrorism. So in the end, it all comes down to a decisive choice between staking everything on one basket of solidarity because it claims exclusivity, or investing in overlapping yet complementary solidarities so we can have a say in a world of crime, military violence. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, David. I wanted to ask you a bit, because I've been joining various discussions this year on European security, and often when France is in that discussion on the concepts of strategic autonomy, for instance, or European army, the French needs to say, oh, there are misunderstandings about these concepts, and then you have a discussion about what they really mean and so on. So, but we heard in the first panel today, Martin had an issue about the communications not being that good. Perhaps so France has a good idea, a vision, but the communications are lacking. Do you agree with that? What does this repeated misunderstanding, why does that occur all the time?
I think it's mainly because we have different histories. I was trying to underline the similarities between Sweden and France in their recent history, and those are almost exceptions. In Europe, most countries have decided otherwise and have decided to really bet on, to bet all their eggs basically on the transatlantic relationship and on US guarantees. Now, in the way the French defense doctrine was framed, it was around this idea of strategic autonomy, this idea that we can be master of our own fate to a certain extent, that we can choose where we want to go and to effectively contribute actually to our transatlantic relationship in that way. And I think this is part of why the US see in us such a good partner. It's because we are capable of taking care of an area while they take care of another, and because we have threats all around right now. So I think it's hard for some of the member states to really think in this way, and this is why I was also giving examples from outside of the pure military sphere. But in more and more domains, there is this sense, I think, which is shared by more and more Europeans, that we cannot be totally dependent on external powers, be it for energy, data, AI, and also military. That we have to be able really to have a say in our future, be it for the fights we will have to encounter, but also for in terms of the roof we live under, and the issue of arms control. If all arms control agreements are signed between two powers, which are Russia and the US, and the Europeans cannot have a say in those agreements, and it will eventually become a problem.
Also, to clarify, the E2I, does that have anything to do with Northern Europe, or is that more driven by out-of-area missions and the need to be able to operate kind of quickly and to be able to gather a group of nations that understand the urgency or the need to act quickly abroad?
Yeah, so it's the EI2. So the EI2 is very much about territorial defense. And just to say also a word about smaller states. When we had the idea of the EI2, it wasn't so much, at least in the beginning, about Germany and Italy and Spain and the UK. It was more about smaller countries, actually. The idea was that when we most needed our partners, we knew that we had the phone numbers and the cell phone numbers of everyone in Berlin, in London, and in Rome. But for smaller partners who have critical niche capabilities, we didn't have this relationship, we didn't have this common strategy culture, we didn't have these scenarios that we had prepared together, we hadn't planned together enough so that we could call them and trust them to come with us. And so the idea was to look at these countries with a smaller amount of capabilities which have this critical added value, and to take them into around the table and discuss on this on all possible interventions, being territorial defense or outside of Europe. And this is why we went to talk about the initiative with Finland and Denmark. And Denmark was also important because it has this opt-out on CSDP. And of course, the participation of the UK for the initiative was important given the current context. But it was really about trying to prepare together for all the interventions that we will need to make in the future, be it within UN or NATO or EU or ad hoc coalitions, but to have really thought together on how we share the burden among this group and how we can contribute best.
Thank you so much. You mentioned also, and that will lead us over to our next speaker, the need and the demands that comes with next generation of defense developments, and the need to deal with that in concert. And I'm curious also, Dr. Ulrike Franke, who's policy fellow at the European Council for Foreign Relations, ECFR in Berlin. You're also an expert on new technologies and how that drives. And this is a region where we have a high level of, I would say, innovation, high technology. We have the whole dual-use spectrum. So, and if you combine this with the development of the European defense corporations, what trends do you see, and how do you view this, the potential for this area?
Thank you very much for having me. Always a treat to come to Stockholm, and certainly especially just before Christmas. So thank you very much for the invitation. So my remarks, I think, may be slightly different from the remarks that we've just heard. Maybe also slightly shorter, because reading the description or reading the questions of this panel, there was one question that we kind of jumped out to me, and that is this question about how should the complex nature of modern conflicts, including the use of new technologies, be reflected in the development of European defense? Because as Anna mentioned, I work on new technologies in warfare. I mean, in addition to broader questions of European defense, I've been looking at drones, artificial intelligence, autonomous weapons, these kind of things. So what I wanted to do today is to share 3 observations with you and make 2 recommendations with regard to these issues. So let's jump right in. The first observation, what really strikes me is that when it comes to new technology, and this is really general and not just defense focused, when it comes to new technologies, it is really striking how little Europe and European countries are thinking about new technologies in a geopolitical way and also in a military way. So I've just finished an analysis and comparative analysis of the AI strategies of France, Germany, Italy, and also had a look at what the European Union is doing. And it was really striking, and I'm taking out the French strategy a tiny little bit, I'll get back to this in a second, but especially the German and the Italian strategy don't think about AI in geopolitical terms at all, and they don't even mention military. This is about the economy, this is about not falling behind, this is about safeguarding what we have. There was no thinking about what does this mean for Europe, where is the kind of geopolitical aspect in this. The French strategy has that more. This French strategy also mentions the military domain, but it is definitely neglected. The second observation on that is that the European countries are these days approaching new technologies in a very reactive and defensive way rather than being focused on the opportunities they can provide. So when you read these strategies, when you listen to the statements, what one can really see or hear is a focus on safeguarding what we have, protecting what we have. There's a real, kind of fear that we may be falling behind, but very rarely is there the idea of this can really help us. This can, help us to achieve something more. I found it most striking in the German case, where when one reads the strategy, I always felt that the underlying narrative was, we would rather not do this, but we kind of have to, so let's get on with it. Which isn't a great look, I would say, for Europe. Third observation, on new technologies in general and on new technologies in the military realm in particular, there's actually surprisingly little European cooperation, or if there is, it's always the second step. So we're still at the stage where all the countries want to have their national strategies first, think about their national approaches first, and then maybe as a second step, go to Europe. The German AI strategy has Europe in the title, but it's still called AI Made in Germany. The French strategy has Europe in the title, but it's called France AI. And when I went to the German MOD asking them, so how, are you thinking about artificial intelligence and warfare, autonomous weapons, all of that? They said, yes, we are. And I go to these events. And so I told them, so why don't you kind of, bind in the Europeans early on? They said, no. We want to have kind of our position first before we go on to talk to the Europeans. Which, on the one hand, you can understand, but on the other hand, it makes cooperation much harder because once you have your strategy formulated, and this is something that takes a lot of time, cooperating then with someone who may have a slightly different strategy is much harder than if you try to develop it together in the first place. Which brings me to my two recommendations. So directly following from the last observation, kind of obviously, I would very much recommend an earlier European cooperation and coordination. And especially and particularly because new technologies, and in particular artificial intelligence, are or will be geopolitical issues. We have all heard Putin, who has said that whoever rules AI will rule the world. That's kind of Putin. I wouldn't go that far, but that being said, of course, whether Europe is a leader or a follower in AI will have impact on its geopolitical cloud, and so it makes a lot of sense for Europeans to cooperate and think about cooperating before you sort out everything on a national level. This is particularly important for artificial intelligence, not just because it's a geopolitical topic, but also because, as I'm sure you're aware, artificial intelligence at this point may change eventually, but at this point is very much based on data, and a lot of data. And European countries are small and collect small amounts of data. So if you want to have great artificial intelligence, it would be so super useful if you could pool European data. That being said, the French strategy suggests exactly that. So it's not as if no one is thinking about this. It takes quite some time. And then my second recommendation, and I realize that what I've been saying has been relatively geopolitical rather than defense-specific, so more defense-specific, and also not particularly surprising, more investment, more European R&D, and more projects on new technologies are needed. There are, some PESCO projects that give me hope. I've said this earlier. I think that some of the PESCO projects can actually amount to something. We'll see. As I mentioned earlier, it's the first anniversary of PESCO today since the activation of PESCO. So of course this hasn't really delivered anything yet, but there are first steps. And if you look at the projects, there are mine hunting underwater drones among the, I think, 34 projects we have now. There is the Euro drone, which is something I've been working on for a long time, so we'll see where that leads us. There are autonomous systems in there. But, it doesn't really seem like this kind of big development that we should be hoping for. And one last point on the Nordics. I mean, I feel that the Nordics, more than anyone in Europe, should have an interest in that, and does have an interest in that. The Nordics do have, good talent on these things, so they could definitely benefit from data from Europe or investment from Europe and all of that. And small countries in general, they can't substitute military quality by quantity, so military quality and new technology can deliver that is particularly important. And I very much support Claudia's call for Nordic thinking on strategic autonomy. This brings me back to the geopolitical thinking that I feel is definitely lacking when it comes to new technology. So if the Nordics can help kind of nudge Europe to think more geopolitically, more strategically, including in these areas of new technologies, that would be extremely helpful.
Thank you so much. I think that was very, very useful and interesting perspective. We have not really touched upon that before. We have in the audience also some representatives from corporations. So I was thinking, if you could just say something on the national strategies that are government-driven, but where do you see for the EU the role of private sector cooperation in this field? Could they cover the geopolitical aspect, or do we need the governments for that? What do you say on that?
I mean, obviously companies have an important role to play, and there are lots of organizations where corporations work together and try to form unions and all of that. That being said, I mean, you can't, China can use its industry, its cooperation, its firms in a way different than Europe can, right? I mean, we have only so much influence on what our corporations, or firms do. So I think that what the European Union or what Europe can do is more along the lines of what I mentioned earlier, namely providing data pools. Again, anonymized data pools. I'm not saying we should follow the US or China when it comes to data security, data collection, but there are ways to actually open up databases that the public sector has, that the European Union has. So I think Europe can help kind of give companies access to these kind of data pools that they can use. The other element, of course, is financing, right? I mean, the European Union strategy, it's a small thing, but that only came out actually a few days ago, so I don't have the numbers with me, but there are, of course, elements of, the European Union just providing money and financing to firms, and that can also be helpful. But, the state does have a role to play here, really, so it can't just all be on the firms.
We will get back to it, but thank you. And I would like to introduce our next speaker. It's Elizabeth Broad, is Associate Fellow and Director of the Modern Deterrence Program at the Royal United Services Institute, more known as WUSI, in London. And Elizabeth used to be also an Associate Fellow at the Atlantic Council. So you have written extensively about this region. Your roots are here in Sweden, although you live mostly abroad. And you have now started this very exciting program, I believe, focusing on resilience and modern deterrence. So we look forward to hearing your view on the opportunities for this region when it comes to securing and using European defence cooperation.
Thank you for having me, and it's always nice to be invited to one's home country, especially when it's as cozy as it is today. And I was thinking, I've been thinking recently that there is a sort of certain sense of depression setting in over the European defence debate. Everything seems to be going in the wrong direction. We don't get done what we set out to do, and one initiative after the other turns out to be a disappointment. But if I could just put things into perspective, and now I'm dating myself, but when I was going to university in Eastern Germany in the early 90s, the Red Army was still there. and they were idle, obviously, because they didn't have a role anymore. But on top of that, the Bundeswehr had obviously also moved in, so there you had two, you might call opposing armies residing next to each other in this, in itself, very turbulent part of the world. And I think it's a miracle that nothing happened, or that nothing untoward happened, considering the stakes involved. And so that's something to bear in mind now that we are concerned about where Europe is going. Very dangerous things were averted or didn't happen that could very possibly, conceivably have happened there. So this debate so far has been a lot about labels, and the title of the talk is in the Nordic-European approach to the European Defence Cooperation, and you asked Anna what distinguishes the Northern European approach, if there is such a thing, but there isn't, as we know, a combination of Northern European countries that have presented a joint strategy. But I think the Northern European approach, if there is such a thing, is that it's based on pragmatism. And so we have all these labels, and then somebody mentioned earlier, the labels keep being changed, and then the project turns out to be a disappointment, and we rename it and refocus it a bit and hope that it will turn out better. And I mean, credit to everybody involved who keeps the optimism alive. But the Northern European approach, or the Nordic-Baltic approach, I think is a very different one, and it's pragmatism. So if we look at what Nordic-Baltic countries have done in recent years, and if I may involve some other Baltic Sea neighbors, we have the long-existing Dutch-Belgian shared navy, where they have two different commands but share a fleet. We have the Swedish and Finnish Air Force that share airfields, that exercise together, that take turns playing the red side. We have the Swedish, Finnish, and Norwegian Air Forces that conduct joint exercises almost once a week. We have a little bit farther south, but Germany and the Netherlands, who have, as was mentioned earlier, integrated, I think, with great success, and it's something that can be replicated elsewhere. A very pragmatic thing to do, integrated the 43rd Mechanized Brigade of the Dutch Army into the 1st Tank Division of the Bundeswehr, because the Dutch discovered they needed tanks again, and the Germans were happy to have a few more men. And that's a fantastic example of how you can maximize your efficiency without calling it anything. Yes, as you said, Anna, it's called the Framework Nation Initiative, but on a daily operational basis, the Dutch don't drive around in tank that says Framework Initiative on them. It's just a tank borrowed from the Bundeswehr. And I think this is the strength of the defense integration that's happening in Europe right now. And it has to be said, I'm not saying this because I was born in this region, but it's really a fantastic testimony or testament to the Northern European and Nordic-Baltic approach. And another example is that the 3 Baltic states are thinking about creating a joint navy. Well, how great is that? It's not going to be called the European Navy. It's just 3 countries that need a few naval vessels and need to pool their resources into a viable navy. And all this is done without great fanfare. And I think in an era where so many grand alliances are having trouble, whether it's distrust or growing pains or just the lethargy or perhaps slowness that comes with being a large alliance, this is exactly where things have to go. And so if we look at further potential, Sweden and Finland can integrate further, and in fact they are planning to. Germany could integrate units with Denmark, for example, with the Danish Navy. And by the way, of course, Germany is already integrating units with, as you mentioned, Claudia, with planning with Hungary, but also with Poland. And of course, we have the JEF, which is also a very low-key initiative, but one that works and actually has a a setup in place so that these countries involved could deploy together. And yes, it's mostly the UK, but everybody is involved, and it's more than a NATO. So this is my praise of pragmatism, which I think is really the Northern European approach to defense of cooperation, and in fact something other parts of the world can learn from, because it's bottom-up, it's based on different needs that each country specifies that it has, rather than grandiose ambition about what the end state should be. Because if you start with the end state, then you will, I think, inevitably be disappointed. But with these small steps, the pragmatic Northern European approach, I think we're already seeing results. And I think, I don't know if there are any Swedish defense plans in the room, but I think the consensus is that these initiatives have done quite well, modest though they have been. So I'll end there. And actually, I hope we can all feel a bit of pride in what is being achieved, even though it doesn't carry fancy numbers.
Thank you so much for that. Just to follow up a bit of Claudia's intervention, and I understand you as you don't share the concern that these small steps undermine the greater institutional frameworks like the EU or NATO.
I think the Swedish, the Nordic and Baltic countries are some of the most committed members of the European Union, and it's a great loss, by the way, that they will lose another pragmatic ally, the UK, or maybe there is hope that the UK averts its decision. But anyway, they are very committed members of the EU, and of course the NATO members in this group are very committed members of NATO and strong believers in the transatlantic alliance. It's just that a grand alliance can't be everything to every member, right? So I think the danger is that the alliance either is weakened because it just can't act quickly enough on every single issue, because not every single issue is critical to every member, which you can solve by allowing countries to team up within the alliance, which would then further whatever the alliance is. Or you can do it like this, where you have groups outside, not particularly formal and not with great institutional setups, but just pragmatic groups of countries that get together on an as-needed basis and pool resources, and, by the way, share a political and military function. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will open up for questions pretty straight away, and I think we have a microphone going. So just raise your hand if you have. Yes, otherwise I will. Well, meanwhile, Ulrike and David wants to comment on each other, or what? So keep it going.
No, just briefly for Elizabeth. I totally get what you're saying in the sense that don't just talk about it and label it, but rather do, which is a pragmatic approach, and I get that. But don't you think that there's a danger that if we do that, we may end up in a situation not dissimilar to what we have with the euro right now, where we created a currency without necessarily having a right framework for it, and so the equivalent in the military sense would be you create joint tank divisions or whatever you want to do, and then you are in a situation where maybe the countries that have done that don't agree on a military operation, and you are in a difficult political situation. So I can see how it works with very specific countries, the 3 Baltic states, where you assume they always has the same view. But even with the Dutch and the Germans, that wouldn't always be so. So don't you see that danger?
Yes, because I think the euro is rather like taking a PESCO, as it were. It's not it's not a small step, and it was actually before the war, or the party was rather. But I agree. I mean, you have to have visions sometimes, but I think visions we may have an era again where visions fall in good soil, but now it's not the time for vision simply because there is so much tension both between the different countries in Europe and within the countries themselves. So if we can come up with a fantastic new vision and an alliance that's supposed to serve this whole group of very different countries, then I think it's very likely that we'll be disappointed. And instead, I mean, may sound too modest, but I think let's build on what works. And I think when it comes to these modern European ways of operating, I mean, what's to prevent other countries from joining in or creating similar systems for themselves? And then in the end, you may have this one uniting structure. But in the meantime, if the Swedish Air Force lacks a regime to exercise against and finds one in the Finnish Air Force, I think it's just a very pragmatic approach. I think it's
Yes, well.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Björn Fagerberg. I'm a diplomat currently as a comment to the Secretariat of the Defense Commission, the parliamentary outfit charged with coming up with hopefully consensus on the future development of defense policy in Sweden. I wanted to address Mr. Beard because you mentioned the EDF, the European Defence Fund. You alluded to what you said, or what you characterized as sort of misunderstandings about the fund, and thank you for clarifying that indeed there will not be any discrimination of any military industry in the EU. And I wanted to mention another, maybe it's a misunderstanding, or at least a misgiving that exists in Sweden, which has to do with the funding, or let's say the financial impact of the EDF. My understanding is that it's not yet clear exactly how much, let's say, this will cost in the end to the states, but there are estimates, let's say, floating around that I've come across that point to this the yearly, let's say, Swedish contribution being somewhere in the vicinity of 70 million euros, and predictably enough, there are some people who fear that this will then, undermine this will hollow out, contribute to hollowing out the defense budget, of course, in the country with a defense budget of around 5 billion euros. This is, potentially a sizable sum. So I wonder if you could comment on sort of this fear.
Thank you.
To my knowledge, it should be a financial fear for the defense budget, because the beauty of the EU budget is that it's not pulled from the ministerial budget. So, at least I say that for France. I mean, the weight of the European defense funds will not be on our defense ministry. We will keep its budget, and the part given to the European defense fund will be taken from the global EU budget. And so the idea is that there will be this $1.5 billion every year. It's not a big amount. It doesn't matter. It's about really the leverage and the synergy that you get from this kind of input. And also the Commission is working on a financial toolbox that can help the companies get the loans they need, etc. And the idea is that with all this, so the idea is that all these companies and the countries that are the clients, so these capabilities, will be able to get their money back. And unless every member state that has a defense industry gets involved in the EDF, then you won't get your money in return. So it's really about trying to develop the projects. And I heard earlier that this CAP, for example, was not linked to the EDF. I don't agree with that. I think that all the big European capability programs will have a direct link to the EDF. Not the entire program, but for example, if you take the SCAF, there will be many bricks of the SCAF project that will receive funds from the EDF. Not yet. I'm joking. Yeah. But we in what we. And if I can just to what Ulrike was saying, just one word on AI, and there were references to DARPA earlier. I think the big difference between today and 30 years ago is that the offset technologies for the military 30 years ago were coming from military research, and today they come from the civilian sector. And so now, all the new military applications that we will have, they will first go through civilian innovation. So the big challenge we have is not about setting a DARPA within a defense ministry. It's about setting, and this is what France is trying to do with the JEF initiative, is to set a DARPA within the civilian research, within Horizon Europe. And then to have bridges between the civilian research and potential military application. So if you don't have the military dimension of AI in the French AI strategy, it's because it's a sensitive issue, and you cannot just say, we're going to develop AI because we want to build weapons. You have to first see how AI develops, then look at the ethics aspect, dimension of it, and then see which kind of military applications can be developed, and build the bridges between these innovations that you will have developed, the databases needed, and then the applications that you have in the military sector. So this is where the EU can have an instrumental role. It's because from all this cool civilian research, you can get bridges with the European defense industry that will use this technology.
Thank you. Yes, I will let Claudia and Enrico respond to that because I think it's relevant for the discussion, and then we'll go to the next question.
A quick word on the European Defence Fund. I totally agree that this is the one of the three instruments which has the highest potential, and that's also the only one which is really, really, really new. Because for the first time ever the Commission comes in, and for the first time ever industry comes in, which we never had before. So there is indeed novelty, and there's potential. But at the same time, I think one of the major problems I see with EU defence, as separated from European defence, is that the EU has been, the member states have been very good in stating ambitions and have been very, very, very bad in implementation. So I think the biggest recommendation I would do is kind of scale down, do expectation management, and formulate objectives and goals which are reachable. So I think one of the elements that will decide whether EDF will really be the revolution in European defence, which I would wish it would become, because there is potential in shaping industries. But one of the elements that will decide upon whether it's going to be a success is the question of who is going to direct the fund in what way, with what mechanisms and structures of government. And I think as long as those questions are not answered in a way that the bigger member states buy in, major projects like the FCAS will not be there. Because you need the states and the companies do buy in that it's really delivering. So I think there is a high potential, far bigger than I see in CARD and PESCO, because for the first time you change the mechanism. CARD and PESCO are about member states doing something. EDF is about the Commission coming in. But I think it would be well advised to be a bit more realistic and a bit more cautious on the expectations we raise, because otherwise we come back to the old European tradition of having high expectations, rhetoric of I don't know what, with little implementation. So better have better results than we predicted, as yet again since Saint-Malo, kind of aiming very high and reaching really it. So that's I think a big call for expectations management.
Thank you. So, do you have a comment on
No,
it was Elizabeth? And then we have last questions. So I know there is one out there, but if there's anyone else, I will gather all of them and then give them a crack. Yes.
So just want to follow up on the discussion of European DARPA or something similar. In addition to the money, the challenges that bright tech guys and women don't want to work for an MOD, they want to work in private companies. And I remember, so I was based in San Francisco 5 years as a technology correspondent, that the Pentagon is toxic to these companies. So I think an alternative model is what the CIA does, in fact the US Army as well, fund through the venture capital arm, fund promising startups, and I think that's sort of a challenge for the European Union, because I guess competition rules mean you can't fund one company if you don't fund all the others in the same category. But I think it would be a very promising approach if the EU could figure out a legal way to do it.
Thank you. And then final question from audience.
Yes, hello. My name is Fredrik Lökes, and I'm since a couple of months the first Special Envoy Ambassador for Countering Hybrid Threats in the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I know this is a panel on specifically on defence cooperation, and I also excuse myself because I came in a bit late, so I haven't heard all the discussions so far. But there's a sort of emerging security discourse and also emerging cooperation on countering hybrid threats in Europe. And my question is to the panel is do we need a sort of a broadened security and defence concept and intellectual understanding of defence and security threats? And also do we need then a sort of a widened conceptual thinking in also how we organize our defence also against non-military antagonistic threats? Or is that's done separately from the sort of more pure defence cooperation? So should we have a sort of more holistic approach to this, or are these two different sets of categories of threats that are best dealt with separately? So I would be interested to hear your views on that.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's an excellent last question. Can we grasp the whole hybrid spectrum? Should we divide it into non-military, military? We can go, you can comment, starting with Elizabeth and going down the reverse.
Just a quick comment for you, which is that you're welcome to visit WUSI because the Modern Deterrence Program does exactly that. Look at how countries should build an integrated defense and deterrence against hybrid warfare. So I will give you this brief answer and let the others answer.
Yeah, so that question kind of comes in waves, right? Or the answer comes in waves. Because there are moments where we really try to keep security focused on like military threats and then broadens out. And it seems to me that we're just at the end of an era where we try to kind of bring it back to kind of military threats, and now all the hybrid threats we're opening up again. Personally, just because I work more on hard security, I always try not to securitize too many areas because it's not super helpful. Once you start where do you end, climate change and migration and all of that. So I would be careful with that, but then again, I don't specifically.
My question is specifically on antagonistic state threats. I mean, I'm not talking necessarily about a widened security concept as such. Yeah. I'm talking about antagonistic threats that are not necessarily defined as military.
Well, who wants to comment?
Let's go down the river.
You don't have to comment, but anyone has any idea on it, please comment.
So I guess as the French, I will go into concepts and theories. No, I had to work on the hybrid concept for a few years in NATO and EU. So I think we don't need more concepts. I think the only added value of the hybrid concept was that it had the whole spectrum, and the idea is that you have to be able to identify simultaneously weak signals in different domains at the same time. So if you take out half of the domains, then it has no purpose. So really the idea was to see that if at some point you had on the military spectrum a small signal, but also on the energy domain also a small signal, and then some trends of cyber attacks at the same time going through a flux, then maybe there's something going on. And this is the whole challenge of this whole government approach, and being able to, at the EU level, for example, getting 14 DGs together, or in France having a centralized exchange of intel from the different ministries. And I also want to add that the cyber domain in itself, of course, is very specific, and it is the big part of the interest for hybrid warfare. And just for the anecdote, the whole idea of European strategic autonomy actually came from the cyber domain. This is where it first appeared. And when we developed at the EU level all the new digital directive, etc., on the digital single market, etc., this is where European strategic autonomy came, because it's in this sphere where autonomy and the fact that of not being dependent from the outside is absolutely key.
Yes.
If you want to go, very briefly. I think the biggest issue here is it's necessary to have the awareness, but the question is, again, the implementation of coordination. What our French colleague just described, and I think one of the reality checks you usually get is that this coordination is a major challenge, but I think you need the awareness of this cross-domain thing, but you will hurt reality, once one hurts reality when it comes to coordination, because everybody wants to coordinate and nobody wants to be coordinated. And this is in the end the real life feedback which you face. But I think we need it.
Thank you so much. It's time to round up both this panel and the whole conference. I'm happy that we ended up with a hybrid area and got some focus on that, because to my mind, we did not explore it further, but it's something that the EU, if you talk about the EU defense and being complementary to NATO and really being able to link into each other, would be really interesting to explore for this region in the future PESCO projects, future relating to planning processes and so on. Also when I think of this region as a high-tech region with a lot of innovative power. So we have this pragmatic, to my mind, concluding this, as has been pointing out, there are pragmatic steps towards coordination, but it's fragmented. And I agree with, I think, all panelists basically being a bit outside perhaps of the Nordic, the Baltic in your daily lives, looking at the region. There is no clear voice really jointly relating to the European discussion, and I think that could be something for us to bring back to where we work and see if we could form a clearer voice regarding the interests of this region and how it links to the cooperation in the broader sense and to the capitals of Paris and Berlin, where things are happening. So please, I will just link into the main question of these panels and the temperature of the Franco-German engine, as we had a heated debate on. To my mind, it's still moving, but there are some question marks. Will France be able to drive this as they have been? Could Germany support it more, as has been explored, stated by a few? Or is it up to France more to be more explicit and really avoid certain concepts that are considered as dangerous? We have discussed that as well. Should strategic autonomy, should it be strategic capability? How do we involve the Americans in this process, and how do we secure both European security and transatlantic, the prevalence of the transatlantic community? The security challenges for Northern Europe region, I think Russia we all know, but to my mind that panel took us back a bit to the power shifts that have been ongoing for a long time and that we now see. I think we have been quite focused on what happened in 2014 and how that has influenced security developments, but now we see that in parallel to that, China and the rivals of the US have continued to function, and now they start appearing more and more, not least in the Arctic, as was discussed. So we need to broaden the analysis also on the challenges. And reversely also, we have positive developments, since the vacuum that was along the eastern flank now is filled with NATO presence, for instance. So we have changes that are also going in a positive direction when it comes to stepping up deterrence, and that's an opportunity we can use when we build on future developments for European defense. So those are my main takings of the discussions today. There are lots and lots of things we have discussed. I think I'm very pleased that we could have such an excellent set of speakers here today, that we took the time to come to Stockholm and share your perspectives. And the debates, I think, was refreshing. I hope you also got some new insights. And I think on behalf of the Atlantic Council and CAS and the Latvian Embassy, I want to thank you all for joining us today. And let's conclude with that and bring it back and keep on the conversation and the discussion. Thank you so much.